This story is titled, My Siblings Refuse to Allow Me to Attend Their Weddings, so I Return the Favor. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hi Reddit. I never thought I'd find myself posting here, but I'm seriously losing my mind over what went down 2 weeks ago. It's been eating away at me, and I need to put it out there to see if I'm overreacting, or if this whole situation is as insane as it feels. So get ready, because this one's a doozy. Growing up, I was always the little one. My name is Emily, and I'm the youngest of 5 kids. My siblings, Mike, Chris, Rachel, and Josh, were all so much older than me that sometimes I felt like I was part of a different family. By the time I was old enough to start forming memories, they were already moving out, going to college, or starting their adult lives. It was like I was an afterthought, a weird tag-along they had to put up with. But even so, I loved them. When you're the youngest kid, you look up to your older siblings like they're heroes. I thought Mike hung the moon when I was little. He was the cool oldest brother who could do no wrong. Chris was quieter and more serious, but I still adored him. Rachel was my big sister, the one I always hoped would let me into her life and show me how to be like her. And Josh, the baby of the older ones, felt the closest to me in age, but even he kept me at arm's length. The first time it really hit me how I didn't matter to them was Mike's wedding. I was 10 years old. 10 is that weird age where you feel old enough to be included in grown-up things, but still young enough to be treated like a child. When Mike and his fiancée Sarah announced they were having a child-free wedding, I assumed that didn't mean me. I mean, I wasn't some random kid who would throw food or scream during the vows. I was his sister. I still remember the day my parents sat me down. I'd been so excited. I even asked my mom if I could wear one of her necklaces for the big day. That's when she said it. Mike and Sarah are having an adults-only wedding, Emily. You're not going to be able to come. I stared at her for a second, trying to process. But I'm not like other kids, I said, trying to reason with her. I'll be quiet. I promise. She patted my head like I was some kind of puppy. It's just for adults, sweetie. You'll understand when you're older. I didn't understand at all. I cried in my room for hours. Mike was my brother, and I wanted to see him get married. I wanted to be there to watch Sarah, who I already thought of as my sister, walk down the aisle. But instead, my parents left me with a babysitter. I remember the feeling of staring at the clock that day, imagining everything I was missing. When Mike came home from his honeymoon, I thought maybe he'd bring it up. Maybe he'd say he was sorry I couldn't come, or tell me some funny story from the wedding. But he didn't. He acted like I wasn't even a part of it, like I wasn't even worth acknowledging. 2 years later, Chris got engaged. I was 12 by then, and I thought things would be different. I was older, quieter, and very well behaved. I didn't whine or cause a fuss, and I made sure everyone knew it. So when they said his wedding was child-free too, I thought, okay, but this time I'll be invited. Nope. Once again, I got the same speech. Chris and his fiancée want the wedding to be adults only, Emily. It's not personal. Not personal? It felt personal. How could it not be personal when it happened twice? I tried not to cry this time. I was older and I wanted to act more mature. I didn't beg or scream. I just sat quietly while my parents made their excuses. My mom even tried to comfort me. You'll have your own wedding someday, and it'll be wonderful. You'll see. But it didn't make me feel better. I was starting to realize something. My siblings didn't see me as family, at least not in the way I saw them. When Rachel got engaged, I was 15. By then, I was a full-on teenager who wanted nothing more than to feel included. At first, Rachel didn't even plan on banning kids from her wedding. She wanted everyone to come. But of course, the family had to get involved. My aunts and uncles kept saying things like, "It's so refreshing to have a wedding without kids running wild. And children just make things so chaotic." Eventually, Rachel caved. The rule became no one under 16. I was 15. 15. So close that it felt like a slap in the face. I went to Rachel and asked, "Can't I just be an exception? I'm your sister. I'll be quiet, I promise." Rachel looked at me with this serious expression and said, "If I make an exception for you, what about the other kids? It wouldn't be fair." Fair? Are you kidding me? I lost it. I started yelling, "It's not fair that I can't go to any of your weddings. I'm not just some kid, I'm your sister." That's when my parents got involved. I got grounded for 6 months for disrespecting Rachel and causing drama. 6 months. I spent most of that time in my room, just stewing in my anger and hurt. By the time Josh got engaged when I was 17, I didn't even bother asking. I already knew I wouldn't be invited. Sure enough, the announcement came, child-free wedding. At that point, I was numb to it. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, and I didn't ask why. I just accepted it. But what really stung? My cousin Amanda, who had just turned 18, was invited. I heard about it through the family grapevine. Apparently, they thought 18 was the cutoff. The irony wasn't lost on me. Amanda was only a few months older than me, but she got to go because she'd hit the magical age of adulthood. When my parents asked why I didn't make a big deal congratulating Josh, I just shrugged. I sent him a quick text. Congrats. Hope it's a great day. Then I locked myself in my room like I always did. By that point, I had started to check out emotionally. I realized that I just didn't matter to them. I wasn't their little sister. I was just a kid they barely thought about. And it hurt. It really, really hurt. Years passed after the last wedding. I stopped trying to fit into my siblings' lives because, honestly, I was just tired. Tired of being the one left out. Tired of being the kid sister, who no one cared about unless it was convenient for them. By the time I met my now fiancé, Tyler, I'd pretty much checked out of the family dynamic. I didn't expect much from anyone anymore. Tyler was the first person to actually listen when I told him about my family. I remember sitting on his couch, telling him about how I'd been banned from 4 of my siblings' weddings, and he looked genuinely shocked. Wait, they didn't invite you? Not even when you were like 15? Nope, I said, trying to play it off like it didn't hurt anymore. What the hell? You're their sister, he said. He just sat there shaking his head for a minute before adding, that's seriously messed up. I think that was when I realized it really was messed up. I'd spent so many years convincing myself it was normal. Child-free weddings sounded reasonable on paper. It wasn't like I was being deliberately targeted, right? But no. 4 times my family chose to exclude me. Not a single sibling thought, hey, Emily should be there. It wasn't normal. So when Tyler and I got engaged a few years later, I knew one thing for certain. My wedding was going to be different. My wedding was going to be full of people who actually cared about me. People who wanted to celebrate me, not just show up because it was expected of them. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't inviting my siblings. It wasn't some big dramatic moment. I didn't write an angry letter or announce it in the family group chat. I just left them off the guest list. Simple as that. I knew it would blow up eventually, but I figured I'd cross that bridge when I got there. The first sign of trouble came about 2 months before the wedding. My mom called me randomly one afternoon, acting weirdly chipper. I should have known something was up. So, Emily, she said in that voice she always used when she wanted something. How are the wedding plans coming along? Good, I said cautiously. Everything's almost done. That's great, she said, pausing for a moment before adding, your brothers and sister haven't gotten their invitations yet. Did you send them out already? My heart started pounding. I didn't want to have this conversation. Not yet. Yeah, I sent them out, I said, trying to sound casual. She didn't miss a beat. Well, they didn't get one. Maybe it got lost in the mail? I sighed. Mom, I didn't invite them. There was silence on the other end of the line, just a heavy, shocked pause. Then came the explosion. What? Emily, how could you not invite your own family? Your siblings? What's wrong with you? I gripped the phone and tried to stay calm. They didn't invite me to their weddings, Mom. Not a single one of them. So I'm returning the favor. It's fair. She sounded like I just committed a crime. That was different. You were young. They didn't mean to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. Well, it hurt anyway. And now I'm done pretending like it didn't. She started in on the guilt trip immediately. Emily, you're being spiteful. Family is family. You don't just shut them out like this. What are people going to think? And there it was. What will people think? My mom's favorite concern. I cut her off before she could say anything else. I don't care what people think, Mom. This is my wedding, and I'm only inviting people who care about me. They didn't care enough to include me in their big days, so I don't see why they deserve to be at mine. She hung up on me. I wasn't surprised. That night, the group chat blew up. It started with Rachel being fake as usual. Hey, Em, did something happen with the mail? We haven't gotten our invites yet. Then came Chris, blunt as always. What's going on? Why aren't we invited? I stared at my phone for a long time, debating whether or not to reply. Part of me wanted to lay it all out, to tell them exactly how much they'd hurt me over the years. But another part of me didn't see the point. They wouldn't get it. They never had. So I didn't say anything. I just left the chat on read. Tyler noticed I was quiet during dinner and asked what was wrong. I showed him the messages, and he shook his head. You don't owe them an explanation, Em. They made their choices. Yeah, but I trailed off. They're gonna make me out to be the bad guy. I know it. Let them, he said firmly. You know the truth. That's all that matters. The next day, my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. I didn't even have to ask what they were there for. My mom came storming in the second I opened the door. What are you thinking, Emily? Not inviting your own siblings to your wedding? What kind of person does that? I tried to stay calm, even though my patience was wearing thin. Mom, I told you. They didn't think I was important enough to include in their weddings, so I'm not including them in mine. My dad finally spoke up, his voice stern. You're being childish, Emily. You're holding on to something that happened years ago. That's when I snapped. I was a child when they did it, Dad. I begged to be at their weddings, and they all shut me out. Don't talk to me about being childish when I was the one left crying at home 4 times. They didn't know what to say to that. My mom looked like she was about to cry, but I didn't let her guilt me this time. You can keep defending them if you want, but I'm not changing my mind. If they cared about me, they would have shown it back then. They left, furious and frustrated. Over the next few days, the messages from my siblings got nastier. Chris called me selfish. Rachel said I was ruining the family. Josh didn't even bother sugarcoating it. You're being petty, Emily. Grow up. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. Tyler hugged me one night while I was scrolling through their messages and said, I'm proud of you, for standing up for yourself. And for the first time, I felt proud of myself too. After the first round of family drama, I expected things to die down. I figured they'd grumble to each other for a while, maybe complain to some distant cousins, and then move on. That's how things usually went when my family didn't get their way, but I underestimated just how big of a deal they were going to make this. It started small. Rachel, of course, couldn't resist posting a passive-aggressive status on Facebook. Family is forever, even when some people forget what that word means. I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. Tyler was scrolling next to me on the couch, and when I showed him the post, he shook his head. What is she, 14? Basically, I muttered, trying to brush it off. I told myself it didn't matter. I knew the truth, and I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong. But it still bugged me. It's hard not to feel hurt when your own sister goes out of her way to take shots at you publicly. It didn't stop there. Over the next few days, little jabs started showing up in our extended family group chat. I'd muted it a long time ago, but Tyler still checked his phone one afternoon and said, Emily? You might want to see this. The messages were flying. Rachel. It's so sad when family starts prioritizing petty grudges over love. Chris. I just don't understand. I thought we were better than this. And then Mike, good old, I'm the eldest and I know best Mike, decided to take his shot. I never realized how much bitterness you've been holding on to, Emily. It's really sad. You're ruining relationships over something that happened years ago. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. They didn't get it. They still didn't get it. They made it sound like I was blowing a minor issue out of proportion, as if they hadn't spent my entire life excluding me. I wanted to reply. I wanted to type out every single thing they had done and make them see how hypocritical they were being, but I knew better. Arguing with them would just give them more ammunition. They'd spin my words into me being dramatic or unstable or whatever else they wanted to say to avoid taking responsibility. Instead, I did the one thing they never expected. I left the group chat. That night, my mom called me. I knew she'd heard about the group chat incident because she jumped straight into yelling the second I answered. Emily, what is wrong with you? Hi, Mom, I said flatly. Don't start with that attitude, she snapped. Do you know what you've done? Your siblings are heartbroken. You're destroying this family. Heartbroken? I laughed bitterly. They ignored me my entire childhood. But now they're heartbroken? Give me a break. You're being so spiteful, she said. You've always been like this, holding on to grudges and making everything about you. That's when I lost it. I'm the one holding grudges. I was 10 when Mike got married. 10. I cried because I wanted to be there, and you all told me I didn't matter enough to be included. And it didn't stop there. It happened again and again and again. I begged to be at Rachel's wedding, and she told me no, because it wouldn't be fair. That was years ago, she said dismissively. Yeah, and I'm still living with the way it made me feel. You all decided I wasn't important enough back then. Why should you suddenly get a front row seat to my life now? She didn't have an answer to that. Instead, she tried to flip the script. This isn't about the weddings, Emily. This is about you pushing everyone away because you're bitter. Tyler's probably encouraging you, isn't he? I groaned. Mom, stop blaming Tyler. This has nothing to do with him. This is about me finally realizing I deserve better than to be treated like I don't matter. Her voice softened, like she was trying to play the concerned mother. Emily, you don't understand. Family is all you'll have in the end. Friends and partners come and go, but your family is forever. No, I said firmly. Family is supposed to care about you. They're supposed to love and support you. That's not what you've been to me. She started crying. Big dramatic sobs that I knew were more about guilt-tripping me than anything else. You'll regret this one day, Emily, she said through her tears. You'll see. I don't think I will, I said quietly, before hanging up. Over the next week, things got worse. I blocked Rachel and Chris on social media because I couldn't take the constant snide comments. My mom called Tyler twice, apparently hoping to talk sense into him. He didn't answer. Then Mike sent me a long email. Yes, an actual email. About forgiveness and family unity. He even had the nerve to quote some Bible verse about letting go of anger. I didn't respond. Tyler and I sat down one night, and I vented about everything. It's like they're determined to pretend I'm the problem. They don't see how messed up it is that they ignored me for years, and then flipped out when I finally stood up for myself. You know what it is? Tyler said. They're not mad that they weren't invited. They're mad that they don't get to control you anymore. That hit me like a punch to the gut. He was right. My whole life, my family had treated me like an afterthought, like someone they could dismiss whenever it suited them. But now that I was doing something for myself, something they couldn't control, they couldn't handle it. They'll get over it eventually, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. And then Tyler said something that really stuck with me. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But either way, it's not your problem. He was right. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe my family anything. Not my time, not my attention, and certainly not an invitation to my wedding. A week later, my dad sent me a short, guilt-laden text. Emily, your mom isn't doing well. She's really upset about all of this. Maybe you could reconsider? I stared at it for a long time before replying. Maybe she should have thought about that before ignoring me all those years. I hit send, then blocked his number. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The weeks leading up to my wedding were a strange mix of excitement and tension. On one hand, I was thrilled to finally marry Tyler and have the day I'd been dreaming of since I was a kid. On the other hand, the drama with my family still lingered like an unwelcome guest. My parents had stopped calling me directly, probably because I'd blocked my mom's number after her last meltdown. But that didn't stop the noise. The worst was when my aunt called me out of the blue. I hadn't spoken to her in years, so I was immediately suspicious when her name popped up on my phone. I answered, and she got right to the point. Emily, honey, I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this, she said, in her sweet but condescending tone. Family is family. It's not right to leave your siblings out of your wedding. I sighed, gripping the phone a little tighter. Aunt Linda, it's not just about the wedding. This has been years in the making. I'm not going to change my mind. But it's family, she pressed, like that word was supposed to fix everything. I'm sure they didn't mean to hurt you back then. Can't you just let it go and be the bigger person? I closed my eyes, trying not to snap. Being the bigger person doesn't mean letting people walk all over you. It's about knowing when to put yourself first. There was a pause on the other end, and I could hear her sigh dramatically. Well, I just hope you don't regret this. One day, you're going to miss your family, and they won't be there. I didn't say anything. I just hung up. The morning of the wedding, I woke up feeling an odd combination of peace and nerves. It wasn't the normal, what if something goes wrong, kind of wedding day jitters. It was more like I was waiting for a shoe to drop. I knew my family wasn't invited, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they'd find a way to insert themselves into the day somehow. But Tyler, being the amazing guy he is, refused to let me dwell on it. When I told him about my worries as we got ready separately, he just smiled and said, This day is about us. Nothing else matters. If anyone tries to ruin it, I'll personally escort them out. That made me laugh, and for the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. The venue we chose was perfect. It was small and intimate, a garden surrounded by flowers, twinkle lights strung through the trees, and a little gazebo where we'd say our vows. I didn't want a giant, elaborate wedding. I wanted something that felt real and full of love, and that's exactly what it was. My closest friends were there, along with some extended family who'd actually been kind to me over the years. It felt right. As I stood in front of the mirror, putting the final touches on my dress, my maid of honor, my best friend Jenna, walked in and grinned. You look amazing, Em. Thanks, I said softly, feeling a wave of emotions. Jenna sat on the edge of the couch and watched me for a moment. Are you okay? I hesitated before nodding. Yeah, I don't know. Sad, I guess. Not about today. Today's perfect, but about the fact that my family isn't here. She frowned and leaned forward. Emily, it's okay to feel that. Just because you made the right choice doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Her words hit me hard. I turned to look at her, tears welling up in my eyes. I wanted them to care, you know. I wanted them to fight for me when I was a kid. And they never did. Jenna stood up and hugged me tightly. You don't need their approval. You have people who love you. Focus on that. I nodded, taking a deep breath. She was right. Today wasn't about my family. It was about me and Tyler. When the ceremony started, I was so overwhelmed by the beauty of it all that I forgot about everything else. I remember standing at the end of the aisle, staring at Tyler, and thinking, this is it. This is what happiness feels like. As I walked toward him, I felt this sense of freedom wash over me. I wasn't the forgotten little sister anymore. I wasn't the kid who begged to be included and got turned away. I was a bride, surrounded by people who truly loved me and wanted to see me happy. The vows were perfect. Tyler promised to love me, protect me, and always stand by my side, and I promised the same. By the time we said, I do, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience, including mine. The reception was everything I hoped it would be. We laughed, we ate, we danced until our feet hurt. My friends toasted to us, sharing funny stories and heartfelt wishes for our future. Tyler's parents, who had always been so kind to me, told me they were proud to have me as part of their family. At one point, I snuck away from the crowd just to take it all in. I stood at the edge of the garden, looking at the lights twinkling in the trees and the people laughing together, and I felt so full. For so many years, I'd believed the lie my family told me, that I didn't matter, that I wasn't important enough to be part of their lives. But standing there, watching all these people who truly cared about me, I realized something. I matter to the people who actually deserve to know me. Later that night, as the reception started winding down, one of my cousins pulled me aside. Hey, Emily, I probably shouldn't say this, but I groaned. What is it now? She looked sheepish. Your mom and Rachel apparently threw some kind of dinner tonight, like as an alternative to your wedding. I stared at her for a second, then burst out laughing. Are you serious? She nodded. I know, it's pathetic. I just thought you should know. I shook my head, still laughing. That's fine. Let them throw their pity party. I hope the food's good. I could tell my cousin expected me to be upset, but honestly, I wasn't. If anything, it was proof that I'd made the right decision. My family had spent my whole life excluding me, and then trying to justify it. Now that I was the one drawing the boundary, they couldn't handle it. At the end of the night, Tyler and I shared one last dance while everyone gathered around us. As we swayed together, I whispered, I'm so happy we did this. He smiled down at me. Me too, Em. This is just the beginning. And for the first time, I believed it. My family wasn't there. They didn't get to see the best day of my life. But that was their loss, not mine. Because as I looked around the room, surrounded by love and laughter, I realized I had everything I'd ever needed, and none of it had come from them. I thought the worst of it was over after the wedding. I really did. The day had been perfect, everything I hoped for and more, and I felt like I'd finally moved on from my family's nonsense. I didn't miss them at the ceremony. I didn't spend a second wondering what it would have been like if they were there. I was surrounded by people who loved me, and that was enough. But if there's one thing I've learned about my family, it's that they don't like being ignored. It's almost like they couldn't handle the fact that I was happy without them, so they decided to stir the pot one last time. It started with a message from Rachel a week after the wedding. Of course it was Rachel. She'd always been the one to throw the first stone when it came to family drama. Saw some pics from your wedding. I can't believe you had it in a garden. Looked casual, but I guess that's what you wanted. I stared at the message, stunned. She couldn't even pretend to be nice. It wasn't enough for her to just leave me alone. She had to find something to criticize. I was tempted to reply with something snarky, something about how her wedding might have been fancier, but at least mine wasn't full of fake smiles and people who didn't care about me. But I stopped myself. I didn't owe her a response. A few days later, I started getting messages from extended family members I hadn't heard from in years. Apparently, Rachel, Mike, and Chris were on some kind of campaign to paint me as the villain. My Aunt Linda, yes, the same one who tried guilt-tripping me before the wedding, sent me another message. Emily, I don't know what happened between you and your siblings, but they're really hurt. Rachel says she tried to reach out, and you're ignoring her. Maybe it's time to let go of the past? I sighed and rolled my eyes. How many times did I have to explain this? How many people did my siblings need to rope into this mess before they realized I wasn't budging? Tyler noticed I was frustrated and sat down beside me. Another guilt trip? He asked, glancing at my phone. Yeah, Aunt Linda again. She says they're hurt. He snorted. Hurt because they can't control you anymore. I smiled faintly. He wasn't wrong. I just don't get it. They ignored me for years. I begged to be included in their lives, and they shut me out. Now suddenly, I'm the bad guy for setting boundaries? That's how it always goes, he said softly. When you start protecting yourself, the people who hurt you are the first ones to cry about it. The real low point came a few days later when my mom showed up unannounced. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Tyler and I were having a lazy day, making brunch in pajamas, laughing over burnt pancakes. We heard a knock at the door, and I froze. I just knew it was her. Sure enough, I opened the door to find my mom standing there, looking as dramatic as ever. "Emily," she said, her voice already carrying that familiar tone of disappointment. "We need to talk," I sighed. "Mom, now isn't a good time." She didn't care. She pushed the door open slightly, trying to step inside. Tyler appeared behind me, gently putting his hand on my shoulder for support. "Emily, please," she continued. "This has gone far enough. Your siblings are devastated. I'm devastated. Do you really think this is how family should act?" I clenched my jaw and kept my voice calm. "You don't get to show up here and lecture me, Mom. I invited the people who care about me to my wedding. They didn't make the cut, and that's their fault, not mine." Her face fell into that familiar look of disbelief, like she couldn't comprehend how I could possibly stand up to her. "You don't mean that. They love you, Emily. They're your family." "No, Mom," I said, my voice firm. "They're not. Family doesn't make you feel small. Family doesn't leave you out when you're a kid and then demand to be part of your life when it's convenient for them. I spent my entire life trying to prove I mattered to them, and they never cared. I'm done." She blinked, stunned into silence for once. I could tell she wanted to argue, but Tyler stepped forward, his voice gentle but strong. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said simply. My mom looked between the two of us, her face a mix of anger and sadness. "You'll regret this, Emily," she said, her voice soft now, like she was delivering a prophecy. "You'll miss us one day, and we won't be there." I met her eyes, unflinching. "No, Mom, I won't." Tyler shut the door behind her, and for a moment, I just stood there, trying to process it. I thought I'd feel guilty, but I didn't. I felt relief. The next day, I got a text from Chris. "Mom said she came to talk to you, and you slammed the door in her face. Real mature, Emily. You've turned into someone I don't even recognize." I read the message aloud to Tyler, who shook his head. "Block him. You don't need that." And I did. One by one, I blocked every sibling and relative who decided to pile onto the guilt train. I realized something important that day. I didn't owe them my time, my energy, or even an explanation. For years, they made me feel invisible. Now, I was taking control. The weeks that followed were quiet for the first time in a long time. Without the constant messages and passive-aggressive comments, I finally felt like I could breathe. Tyler and I focused on settling into married life, decorating our little apartment, and planning our future. One night, we sat on the couch, watching some cheesy movie, and Tyler turned to me. "Do you regret it at all, not having them at the wedding?" I thought about it for a moment before shaking my head. I thought I would, but I don't. I spent so long trying to earn their approval, and for what? I don't miss them. I don't miss feeling like I'm not good enough. He smiled and squeezed my hand. "Good. You deserve better." And he was right. I did deserve better. A month after the wedding, I got one final message. This time it was from Rachel's number, sent through a different phone since I'd already blocked her. "You've destroyed this family, Emily. I hope you're happy." I stared at the screen for a second before deleting the message. I didn't even feel angry anymore. I just felt done, because I was happy. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't begging for scraps of love and attention. I was surrounded by people who cared about me, and that was enough. It always had been.
I'm a 22-year-old woman who inherited the house I grew up in from my mom after she passed away last year at 47 from a sudden stroke. I've come to terms with her passing. My parents divorced when I was 7, so I split my time between my mom and dad. I was always closer to my mom because she understood me, while my dad, now 50, was often too busy with work or women to give me much attention. As long as I had my mom, I was okay with it. After I turned 18 and started college, my dad moved to Houston for work, so we only saw each other during the holidays. 2 years ago, he brought his girlfriend, Julia, and her 2 daughters, 18 and 16, to spend Christmas with us. It was surprising since he'd never introduced any girlfriends to us before. We welcomed them warmly, and everyone got along well. Even after that, Julia was always sweet to me on the phone, though her daughters were shy and kept to themselves. When my mom passed, she left the house to me. She had wisely divided her assets in her will when I turned 18, always planning ahead. After graduation, I decided to move into the house and find a local job, wanting to stay in my childhood home for a while. My dad wasn't happy about my mom's decision and made sure I knew it. He and Julia had been supportive during the funeral, but he became morose once he realized he wasn't getting the house back. This house was where my parents lived when they first got married, but my mom took it over during the divorce, which I think was fair since my dad didn't have to pay alimony. Mom gave up her career to raise me, letting my dad focus on his job. She worked hard to make sure I never felt neglected. I thought it was unfair for my dad to be upset about not getting the house back, and though he didn't say much, his behavior showed his displeasure. At the time, I didn't care. I was still grieving my mom, so my dad being annoyed about her will was the least of my worries. She left him all her wedding jewelry and the gifts he gave her, which should have been enough for him. He went back to Houston with Julia a few weeks after the funeral, and I've been living on my own since. About 6 months ago, my dad told me he was engaged to Julia and wanted to get married here. He planned to come back for the weeks leading up to the wedding, staying in the house rather than a hotel. Their daughters were homeschooled, so that wasn't an issue. I agreed to let them move in with me because I was tired of living alone, and I got along well with Julia. Plus, my dad promised to split all the bills. They moved in a month ago, and it was nice having them around. I felt less lonely and thought I could get used to it. I even dreaded the day they'd leave because I didn't want to be alone again. But 2 weeks ago, 3 days before the wedding, my dad asked if they could move back here permanently. I was surprised, but he explained he wanted to ease me into the idea of being part of a family and didn't like me living alone. I wanted to say yes immediately, but his behavior about not getting the house back made me hesitate. As much as I liked the idea, I didn't think it was wise to make a quick decision. I needed time to think. It felt logical to wait and not act on my emotions. I told him I needed more time and would let him know after the wedding. He looked annoyed but didn't push it. 10 days ago, they got married, and we had a blast at their wedding. They were supposed to stay a few more days before moving back, so I was preparing to tell them my decision, which was a yes. But before I could, they all took off on their honeymoon without telling me. 2 days after the wedding, I woke up alone. Their belongings were still here, so I tried calling them, but nobody answered for hours. Finally, around noon, Julia called back and casually informed me they had left for their honeymoon and would be back in a week. I was stunned. I expected them to at least tell me or include me in their plans. I asked why they hadn't told me, and she gave a lame excuse about forgetting but assured me they'd be back soon. I tried to explain that my issue was with them leaving without a word, but she brushed it off, saying my dad was busy and didn't have time to talk. I kept my cool and asked her to let me know when my dad was available. Her tone changed and she became snarky, saying my dad was busy for the next few days and I shouldn't bother them. She told me not to act hysterically just because I felt left out, reminding me I wasn't a child anymore and needed to accept that my dad had a new family. She wanted me to get over it and clean the house before they returned. I was furious. I decided not to call my dad and was grateful I hadn't agreed to let them move in before seeing this side of Julia. There was no way they were living with me anymore. I packed their belongings as haphazardly as I could, stuffed them in cardboard boxes, and left them in the yard. I didn't care what happened to their things. They didn't belong inside my house. Yesterday, they came back from their honeymoon. Luckily, I was at work when they found their stuff in the yard. I had changed the locks, so they couldn't get in. My dad was extremely pissed when he contacted me about it. He told me I was being a brat and overreacting, claiming they did nothing wrong. I told him to take their boxes and leave, and if they were on my property when I got home, I'd call the police. He cursed and hung up. I had to get back to work and couldn't waste time worrying. When I got home, their things were gone. I thought it was over, but around midnight my dad called. Julia apologized, saying she wanted to make amends and didn't want bad terms over something petty. I told her to shut up and leave me alone. Her sudden change felt fake, clearly driven by not being allowed to live with me anymore. If she had any regrets, she would have apologized sooner, not after their vacation. My dad wasn't sorry either. He tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was heartless for not letting them stay, offering to split bills. He claimed he wanted to live here to feel closer to my mom. Julia's outburst was just a bad mood, he said, and even her kids missed me. But I wasn't having it. I knew my dad had his eye on this house since the divorce, and after seeing Julia's true colors, I didn't want to risk it. I told him they could go back home. He started bawling, accusing me of being selfish, saying I was ruining his happiest memories. He called me petty and mean, saying my mom would hate this side of me. But I stood my ground. I wasn't letting them move back in after Julia's rudeness and their lack of consideration. Update. The comments on my original post were a reality check. Some were rude, but I got the point. I stuck to my decision. My dad doesn't deserve to live here after being awful to me. It was nice while it lasted because they were sweet initially, but their true colors showed once I said I needed time to think. They thought they could intimidate me, but I'm not that weak. I'd rather be lonely than spend time with the wrong people. I shouldn't have let them come here at all. My dad's reaction when he learned the house was mine should have been a red flag. It showed me how materialistic and selfish people can be. As for Julia, I'm glad she picked a fight with me and messed things up for herself. If she hadn't, we might have ended up as a happy family, but I won't fall for their fake behavior again. I was lonely, missing my mom, and with no grandparents left. I needed a family for support, but these people aren't it. I'm relieved I realized this before it was too late. It's been a few days since they left, and my dad keeps calling and texting, hoping for another chance. But they don't deserve it. They blew their one shot, and I can't risk giving them another. I feel bad treating my dad like this, but he never put in much effort with me. He doesn't get to complain now that I'm making decisions for myself. Update. My dad's desperate to move in because he lost his job months ago. He spent all his savings on the wedding and honeymoon. Julia quit her job to be a stay-at-home mom, so now they're broke. My dad assumed I'd let them stay. Julia didn't know the truth until recently, which is why she apologized. She's as fake as they come, but that's what my dad deserves. Today, my dad asked to stay a few days until he finds a job. I told him no. They've been nasty to me, and I don't need that negativity. He should have known better than to splurge on a wedding and honeymoon without a job. That's not my problem, and I refuse to feel guilty. I texted him back, explaining this politely. He took it as mockery and said I'd suffer for what I was doing. I didn't respond because anything I say will be turned against me. It's better to let him wallow in his misery. It's not my problem anymore. Update 3. My dad decided to leave the city today, but couldn't do it silently. He made sure to let me know what a huge disappointment I am as a daughter. He and his wife had to make a whole scene out of it. I last spoke to him about 3 weeks ago, but we didn't check in with each other after that. Today, both he and Julia texted me, saying they were delighted to announce that Julia's ex-boyfriend decided to sponsor their trip back home. Apparently, he realized he needed to see his daughters. Julia had full custody, and her ex paid child support, but was too busy to spend time with his kids. He waited for Julia and my dad to sort things out, but finally decided to step in himself. They didn't give me all the details. They posted a picture of their daughters with Lucky Charm and 4-leaf clover stickers. I can guess the real story behind Julia's ex's sudden epiphany and why he's funding their trip. Julia's manipulation and stubbornness likely played a role. I've seen that side of her before. I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm just relieved they're leaving. This will be the last I have to deal with them. Reading other people's stories about their crazy families made me realize I had it easy. My dad is too worried about his reputation to harm me. He knows I call the cops without hesitation. Plus, I have enough training to defend myself. With them gone, I have even less reason to worry. I still feel lonely sometimes, but instead of dwelling on it, I go to my friends. After my mom passed away, I shut everyone out without realizing how alone I become until I read the comments here. It's going to take time, but I'm going to make the best of my life now. I have a stable job, a decent income, and my own house, thanks to my mom. I have great friends who care about me. Honestly, what more do I need? If I get into trouble again, I'll just come back here. I'm sure the wonderful people on Reddit will bail me out once again.
This story is titled, Stepdaughter Said That I'm Not Her Real Mom and Shouldn't Tell Her What to Do. You're nothing to me. You're a nobody. So when it came time to pay for college, I told her to let her real mother pay for her tuition. Hi everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Hey, Reddit. So here's my story. I don't know why I stayed so long or why I let things get so bad, but looking back now, it feels like I was blind to all the red flags. My name's Lauren. I'm 46, and I own a bakery in Philadelphia. It's my pride and joy, something I built up from scratch with a lot of sweat and long nights. It's small, but successful, and I've always worked hard to make it a welcoming spot for the neighborhood. About 7 years ago, I met Greg. He was this contractor I hired to renovate the bakery when I was trying to expand. Right from the start, he had this way of making you feel like you could trust him. He wasn't bad looking either. Tall, dark hair, nice smile. He'd always take the time to chat with me when he was on a break, telling me about his life. He had this way of making it sound like he'd been through a lot, but was working hard to overcome it, you know? He talked about his daughter, Chloe, who was 11 at the time. He said she was his whole world, and that he'd been raising her on his own after his ex-wife, Nina, lost custody. According to him, Nina was irresponsible and caused a lot of chaos in their lives, so Greg had stepped up as the solid parent. He made it sound like he was some kind of superhero dad. And honestly, I ate it up. I thought, wow, what a good guy, taking care of his kid like that. Within a year, we were talking about marriage. Greg had this way of making everything sound like we were building a life together. He'd say things like, Chloe and I would love to have a real family again. And I guess I let myself believe that I could give them that. It wasn't just about Greg. It was Chloe too. She was shy at first, but sweet in her own way. I wanted to give her a stable, happy home, something I didn't really have growing up. So, we got married. Greg and Chloe moved into my house, which was bigger and closer to better schools for her. At first, it was great. We did family dinners, game nights, and weekend outings. Chloe seemed to be warming up to me. And Greg? Well, he seemed perfect. He'd help around the house, tell me how much he appreciated me, and remind me that we were building a future together. But looking back, the cracks started showing pretty early on. 4 years after we got married, Greg told me he was leaving his contracting job. He said the management was toxic and that he couldn't stand the way they treated him. I was sympathetic at first. I mean, everyone deserves to work somewhere they feel respected, right? He said he just needed a little time to figure out his next step, and I didn't question it. Chloe, on the other hand, seemed to be adjusting well to her new school and neighborhood. She was making friends, joining clubs, and even started talking about college plans. One day, she came home from school and said she needed a $200 calculator for some advanced math class. I told her I'd look into it, but before I could even finish the sentence, she snapped, "What's there to look into? I need it." Greg, who was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone, chimed in with, "Just get it for her, Lauren. It's for school." Like, excuse me? I'm already paying for everything, and you're just going to sit there and tell me what to do with my money? I should have said something then. I should have set boundaries, but I didn't. I wanted to keep the peace. I told myself, this is what families do. You support each other. So I bought the damn calculator and pretended it didn't bother me. But deep down, I was starting to feel like I was being taken advantage of. The thing that really got to me was how Greg talked about our future while doing absolutely nothing to contribute to it. He'd sit there with his coffee, telling me about these grand plans to start his own business. Once I get it up and running, Lauren, you'll see. I'll make sure you don't have to work so hard anymore. It sounded great in theory, but there was zero follow-through. He didn't even have a business plan. It was all talk. Okay. At first, I tried to be understanding of Greg quitting his job. Everyone hits rough patches, right? But I wasn't expecting his rough patch to turn into a full-on freeloading lifestyle. But weeks turned into months, and the man did absolutely nothing. I'd come home from 12-hour days at the bakery to find him sprawled out on the couch, eating chips and watching reruns of old cop shows. He didn't even bother to change out of his sweats most days. Meanwhile, the groceries he promised to pick up tomorrow were still not bought. The sink was full of dishes, and the trash was overflowing. "Hey, Greg," I'd ask, trying not to sound too annoyed. "Did you send out any job applications today?" "Not yet," he'd say, eyes glued to the TV. "I'm still working on my portfolio. You know, for the freelance gigs I'm planning." Oh, the freelance gigs. Let me tell you about those. Apparently, Greg's big plan was to start some kind of home renovation consulting business. He talked a lot about pivoting his skills and being his own boss. Sounds impressive, right? Except he never actually took any steps toward making it happen. No website, no business cards, no marketing, nothing. One time, I even offered to help him set up an Instagram account to showcase his work. I thought maybe if he had a platform, he could attract clients. But he just shrugged and said, "I'll get to it later. Social media is not my thing." Like, dude, it's 2023. If you're trying to start a business, you need some kind of online presence. While Greg was busy planning his imaginary empire, I was footing the bill for literally everything. Mortgage, Mr. Utilities, Mr. Groceries, you guessed it, me. Chloe's school expenses, oh yeah, also me. And let's not forget Greg's little hobbies. He started getting into woodworking as a stress reliever, which meant I was buying him expensive tools and supplies that sat untouched in the garage. One day, I came home from the bakery and found a $400 saw sitting in the living room. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the receipt. "Oh, that's for my new project," Greg said, not even looking up from his laptop. "I'm going to build a custom coffee table for the living room." "Greg, we already have a coffee table," I pointed out. "Yeah, but it's not personal, you know? I want something that represents us." The coffee table never got built. The saw stayed in the box for weeks, until I eventually shoved it into the garage to get it out of sight. Meanwhile, Chloe was catching on to her dad's vibe and started acting like the world owed her too. Every time she wanted something, she'd just assume I'd buy it for her. She didn't even bother asking Greg because, let's be real, he was just as broke as she was. "Lauren," she said one evening, sliding her laptop across the table toward me, "I need this jacket for school. It's for the senior trip." The jacket was $250. A jacket for one trip. "Chloe, that's really expensive," I said. "Can't we find something similar that's a little cheaper?" She rolled her eyes so hard, I thought they might fall out of her head. "It's mandatory," she said, like I was being unreasonable. "Everyone else is getting one." Before I could say anything, Greg chimed in from the couch. "Just get it for her, Lauren. It's not that big of a deal." Like an idiot, I caved. I swiped my card, told myself it wasn't worth the argument, and tried to move on. But it didn't stop there. Oh no. Chloe started treating me like her personal ATM. Need money for a field trip? Ask Lauren. Want the newest iPhone? Lauren will pay for it. She didn't even say thank you most of the time. It was just expected. One day I overheard her talking to one of her friends on the phone. "Yeah, my stepmom's loaded," she said, laughing. "She doesn't even care how much stuff costs." I just stood there, stunned. Is that what she thought? That I didn't care? That I was just some endless source of money? Greg wasn't any better. He started making these little comments that rubbed me the wrong way. Like, if I ever complained about how busy I was at the bakery, he'd say, "Well, at least you're making good money." Or if I brought up the bills, he'd go, "You're doing fine, Lauren. Why stress about it?" Why stress? Because I was paying for 3 people on one income, Greg. That's why. One night, after a particularly long day, I decided to sit Greg down for a serious talk. "Listen," I said, "I'm happy to help while you're figuring things out, but this can't go on forever. You need to start contributing, Greg. We're supposed to be a team." He looked at me like I'd just told him to walk to Mars. "I am contributing," he said. "I help around the house, don't I? I take care of Chloe." "Greg," I said, trying to keep my cool. "Helping around the house isn't the same as paying bills, and Chloe's almost 18. She doesn't need a babysitter." He sighed like he was the one being inconvenienced. "Lauren, I just need more time. You've got the bakery. It's not like we're struggling." That was the moment I realized Greg didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a provider. Someone who would keep everything running while he coasted through life. I decided to give him one last chance. "Okay," I said, "but you need to have a concrete plan by the end of the month. No more excuses." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't taking me seriously. And surprise, the end of the month came and went with no plan, no job, and no change. I started feeling trapped, like I was carrying the weight of the entire household on my back while Greg and Chloe just sat there, taking advantage of me. I loved my bakery, but it felt like all the joy was being sucked out of my life because I was working so hard to support two people who didn't appreciate me. When I look back, I should have put my foot down sooner. But at the time, I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that Greg would snap out of it, that Chloe would grow up and start acting responsibly. I wanted so badly for us to be a happy family that I ignored all the signs that it wasn't working. But things were about to get a whole lot worse. By the time Chloe's 18th birthday rolled around, I was so desperate to keep the peace in our house that I didn't even realize how much I was bending over backward for people who didn't give a damn about me. Chloe had been dropping hints for months about how her birthday needed to be epic because it was the big one. You know, turning 18 and all. She wanted it to be the kind of party her friends would talk about for weeks. "Lauren, can we have the party at the bakery?" she asked one evening while scrolling on her phone. "It's like super cool, and my friends are always saying how classy it looks." Classy? Sure. But classy doesn't come cheap. I hesitated for a moment, knowing full well this would cost me more than I was comfortable spending. Before I could even answer, Greg chimed in, "Come on, Lauren. It's her big day. Let's make it special." This man, who still hadn't lifted a finger to contribute financially, was pushing me to throw an extravagant party? But like a sucker, I agreed. I told myself it was for Chloe, not Greg, and that maybe this would help us bond more. Big mistake. I went all out for the party. I closed the bakery for the evening, hired a local band to play live music, and ordered these gorgeous custom cupcakes with edible gold accents. I even let Chloe pick out the decorations, which included some ridiculous balloon arch that cost nearly $500. But hey, I wanted her to feel special. In the days leading up to the party, Chloe was buzzing with excitement. She kept talking about how her friends were going to love it and how it was going to be the best night ever. I asked her for a guest list so I could plan accordingly, but she kept brushing me off. "Don't worry about it, Lauren," she'd say. "It's just a small group of friends." I should have known better. The night of the party, I showed up early to make sure everything was perfect. The bakery looked stunning, and I was actually kind of proud of what I'd pulled off. Chloe arrived about an hour later, dressed to the nines in a designer dress I had bought her. She looked amazing, and I could tell she felt like a queen. Her friends started trickling in, and soon the place was packed, not just with her classmates, but also with random people I'd never even heard of. It was chaos. Kids were running around, snapping selfies, and blasting music louder than I was comfortable with. But Chloe looked happy, and I figured that was the point. Then, just as I was starting to relax, she walked in. Nina, Chloe's mom. I knew it was her the second I saw her. She had this air of entitlement, like she owned the place. She was wearing this gaudy outfit that didn't match the vibe of the party at all, and her lipstick was smeared like she hadn't checked a mirror all night. She walked right up to Chloe, arms wide open, and yelled, "There's my baby girl!" Chloe froze for a second, glancing nervously at me, but then she hugged her mom like nothing was wrong. "Mom, you made it," she said, smiling. Made it? I hadn't invited her. I didn't even know Chloe had invited her. But there she was, acting like she belonged. I tried to keep my cool, but my heart was racing. I walked over to Greg, who was standing in the corner sipping a soda like he was a guest at someone else's party. "Greg," I said quietly, "did you know Nina was coming?" He looked at me like I'd just asked him if the sky was blue. "Of course I did," he said. "Chloe told me she wanted her mom here. I didn't think it'd be a big deal." Not a big deal? The woman hadn't shown up sober to a single event in years, and now she was at my bakery, crashing a party I paid for? I was furious, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Not yet. I tried to avoid Nina, but she made that impossible. She was everywhere, hugging Chloe, chatting with her friends, and loudly telling stories about how she used to throw parties just like this when Chloe was a kid. It was infuriating. Then, as if she hadn't already made her presence loud enough, she walked up to my table where I was sitting with Greg and Chloe and said, "This is my spot. Move." I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "Excuse me?" I replied. "This is my daughter's party," she snapped. "I'm her mother. I should be sitting next to her, not you." I looked at Greg, hoping he'd step in, but as usual, he just stared at his drink like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Chloe, who was sitting next to us, didn't say a word either. She just looked down at her phone, pretending not to notice. "I'm not moving," I said firmly. "There are plenty of empty seats. Feel free to pick one." Nina's face turned red. "Oh, look at you," she sneered. "The big bad stepmom who thinks she can replace me. Guess what? Money can't buy love." Before I could respond, she grabbed a plate of food off the table and hurled it onto the floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the room, and everyone stopped talking. It was dead silent. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You're not welcome here." Nina laughed like I'd told a joke. Oh, you think you can kick me out? You're nothing, Lauren. Nothing. I signaled to the bakery's security staff. Yes, I had security, because I wasn't stupid enough to think a party full of teenagers wouldn't need supervision. They escorted Nina out while she screamed and caused a scene in front of all the guests. Chloe looked mortified. And Greg? He still didn't say a damn word. After Nina was gone, the party felt tense. Chloe tried to play it off, but you could tell her friends were uncomfortable. The whispers started. Did you see her mom? I can't believe that just happened. People left early, and Chloe barely spoke to me for the rest of the night. When we got home, I tried to talk to her. Chloe, I'm sorry about what happened tonight, but she cut me off. This wouldn't have happened if you just let her sit with us. You made it worse. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I'd done to make her birthday special, she was blaming me for her mom's behavior? I looked at Greg, hoping for backup, but he just muttered, let's talk about this tomorrow. After the disaster that was Chloe's birthday, you'd think Greg might have stepped up and at least tried to show some appreciation or support. Nope. Instead, he doubled down on being the most entitled, lazy, and delusional person I've ever met. By this point, I wasn't even angry. I was just exhausted. Mentally, emotionally, financially, exhausted. Things hit a new low when Greg decided he was going to help out by taking over some of the household chores. At first, I thought, finally, he's doing something. But of course, it didn't last. For about a week, he'd occasionally do the dishes or vacuum the living room, but then he started complaining about how draining it was. This is a lot of work, he said one evening, as he tossed a load of laundry onto the couch. I don't know how you expect me to do all this and focus on my business. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Greg, I've been doing all of this and running a business for years. What are you talking about? He shrugged. Yeah, but you're used to it. This is new for me. I couldn't even respond. What was there to say? The man was allergic to responsibility. And then there was Chloe. If Greg was a freeloading mooch, Chloe was quickly becoming his protege. She'd picked up on his attitude and ran with it. She wasn't just asking for things anymore. She was demanding them. One evening, she came downstairs and announced that she needed new furniture for her room. Not just a desk or a chair. She wanted a full makeover. New bed, new dresser, new everything. I've outgrown all my old stuff, she said, flipping her hair like she was a Kardashian. I need something more mature. Chloe, we can't afford that right now, I said firmly. Maybe we can look at updating a few things next year. Her face turned red. You just don't want to spend money on me because I'm not your kid, she snapped. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been doing my best for this girl, and she had the nerve to say I didn't care about her because she wasn't my biological daughter. I didn't even know how to respond. Greg, of course, didn't say a word. He just sat there, staring at his phone like nothing was happening. That night, I sat down with Greg and laid it all out. You need to get a job, I said bluntly. I don't care what it is, but you can't just sit here and expect me to do everything. It's not fair. Greg didn't take it well. You're being selfish, he said, crossing his arms. You don't understand how hard it is for me right now. I laughed. An actual laugh, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Hard for you. Greg, I'm the one working 12-hour days while you sit on your ass. How is that fair? He just shook his head. You don't get it, Lauren. You've always been about the money. You don't care about my dreams. That was it. That was the moment I realized Greg didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a bank account. Greg's true colors were in full view, and I knew things weren't going to get better. But little did I know, Chloe was about to up the stakes and push me to my breaking point. Chloe's graduation was the grand finale. By this point, I was so worn down by Greg and Chloe's entitlement that I could barely muster the energy to argue anymore. I'd become the human version of sure whatever, just going along with things to avoid yet another blow-up. But let me tell you, this one took the cake. It started a couple of weeks before Chloe's graduation ceremony. She came home one day, full of excitement, waving a letter from her school. They're giving me an award at graduation, she announced, practically skipping into the kitchen. That's great, Chloe, I said, genuinely happy for her. What's the award for? Something about leadership or community service? I don't know, she shrugged, already texting someone on her phone. But the important thing is, I get to go on stage. I smiled and congratulated her, even though it bugged me a little that she didn't even know what the award was for. Still, I figured this was a proud moment for her, and I wanted to support her. What I didn't realize was how quickly things were about to spiral out of control. The first sign of trouble came when Chloe announced that she wanted to have a big graduation party at the house. We'll keep it simple, she said, which I now know is Chloe speak for start prepping your wallet. When I asked her how many people she wanted to invite, she casually said, oh, like 50, maybe 60. Chloe, 60 people? I said, my eyes practically popping out of my head. Where are we even going to fit that many people? We'll do it in the backyard, she replied, like it was no big deal. Just rent some tables and chairs, and maybe a tent. It'll be fine. Fine? I was still recovering from the disaster of her birthday party, and now she wanted me to host an even bigger event? I glanced at Greg, hoping he'd step in and suggest something more reasonable. Of course, he didn't. She's only graduating once, he said with a shrug. We should make it special. I gritted my teeth but agreed to the party. As the graduation ceremony got closer, Chloe's demands started piling up. She needed a new dress for the event. Nothing cheap, Lauren? This is a big deal. New shoes to match the dress, professional hair and makeup, and of course, a custom cake for the party. By the time I finished paying for everything, I was out hundreds of dollars. Not once did Greg or Chloe even offer to chip in. On the morning of the ceremony, Chloe came downstairs wearing her brand new dress, looking like $1,000,000. She glanced at me and said, "Don't forget to bring flowers for after the ceremony. It'll look weird if I don't get any." It'll look weird? Not, "Hey Lauren, could you please bring flowers?" No, it was just expected that I'd show up with a bouquet like some personal assistant. I bit my tongue, grabbed my keys, and ran out to pick up flowers before we headed to the school. By the time we got there, I was already exhausted, but I plastered on a smile and tried to focus on Chloe's big moment. The ceremony itself was fine. Chloe got her award, walked across the stage, and beamed at the applause. For a split second, I thought, okay, maybe this will be worth it. Maybe she'll realize how much I care and start treating me better. After the ceremony, we met her outside to take pictures. Greg handed her the bouquet I'd bought, taking all the credit, of course. "Your stepmom picked these up," he said, like it was some minor afterthought. Chloe barely glanced at me. "Oh, thanks, I guess." Thanks, I guess? I'd been running myself ragged to make this day perfect for her, and all I got was a half-hearted thanks? I swallowed my frustration and smiled for the pictures, but inside I was fuming. The real drama started at the graduation party. I'd spent all day setting up the backyard, arranging tables, hanging decorations, and making sure the food was perfect. By the time the guests started arriving, I was running on fumes. Chloe, on the other hand, was in full party mode, laughing with her friends and posing for pictures like a celebrity. Greg, as usual, was nowhere to be found, probably hiding inside, scrolling on his phone. About an hour into the party, Chloe came up to me and said, "Mom's coming over." I froze. "What do you mean, Mom's coming over?" "She wants to congratulate me," Chloe said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I told her to stop by. "Chloe," I said, trying to stay calm, "after what happened at your birthday, I don't think it's a good idea for Nina to come here." Chloe rolled her eyes. "That was your fault, Lauren. If you hadn't been so rude to her, none of that would have happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Chloe, she caused a scene, insulted me, and destroyed property. How is that my fault?" "You just don't get it," Chloe snapped. "She's my real mom, and she's part of my life whether you like it or not." I turned to Greg, hoping he'd back me up. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Let's not make a big deal out of this. It's her day." I'd spent weeks planning this party, paid for every single thing, and now I was supposed to let his ex-wife waltz in and ruin it? Absolutely not. "Nina is not coming into this house," I said firmly. End of discussion. That was all Chloe needed to lose it. "You're not my mom," she screamed, loud enough for the entire party to hear. "You're nobody. Who do you think you are, telling me what to do?" The party went dead silent. I could feel everyone staring at me, waiting to see how I'd react. Greg just stood there, staring at the ground like a coward. "I'm the person who paid for this entire party," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm the person who's been supporting you for years, while your father sits on his ass. And if you can't respect me in my own home, you can leave." Chloe's face turned red with anger. "Fine! I don't want to be here anyway." She stormed off, dragging a group of her friends with her. The rest of the party fizzled out after that. Guests made awkward excuses and left, leaving me alone in a backyard full of half-eaten food and overturned chairs. Greg finally came outside, but instead of apologizing, he blamed me. "You didn't have to escalate things," he said. "You could have just let her have this one day." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Greg, she humiliated me in front of everyone and you did nothing." Again, he shook his head and walked back inside, leaving me to clean up the mess. A few weeks after Chloe's graduation fiasco, things in the house were tense, to say the least. Chloe barely spoke to me, which honestly was a bit of a relief. When she did, it was usually to complain or throw in a passive-aggressive comment about how I ruined her party. Greg wasn't much better. If he wasn't completely ignoring me, he was muttering things under his breath about how I needed to be more understanding. But the real storm hit when Chloe got the letter she'd been waiting for, her acceptance to NYU. She came bursting into the house one afternoon, waving the envelope around like she just won the lottery. "Lauren, Dad, I got in!" she screamed, practically jumping up and down. "That's great news," I said, genuinely happy for her. I figured, after all the drama, maybe this could be a turning point. Maybe she'd start taking responsibility and working toward her future. Silly me. Greg hugged her, grinning like a proud father. "I knew you could do it, kiddo." Chloe turned to me with that all-too-familiar smirk. "So, Lauren, when can we talk about tuition?" The room went quiet. I blinked at her, caught off guard. "Tuition?" I asked. "Chloe, NYU is expensive. Have you looked into scholarships or financial aid?" She rolled her eyes. "I got some aid, but it's not enough. I figured you'd help cover the rest? I mean, you've got the money." I looked at Greg, expecting him to step in and explain how college expenses weren't just my responsibility. Instead, he nodded like it was already a done deal. "She's right, Lauren. You can afford it." That was the moment I realized they'd been planning this behind my back. Greg had probably been feeding her the idea that I'd just opened my wallet, no questions asked, like I always did. But this? Paying tens of thousands of dollars for a kid who had spent the last year treating me like garbage? No way. "Chloe," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I'm really proud of you for getting into NYU, but I can't just write a blank check for your tuition. Have you considered getting a part-time job or looking into more scholarships?" Her face turned red. "A job? Are you serious? How am I supposed to focus on school if I'm working all the time?" "Plenty of students work while they're in college," I replied. "It's a good way to build responsibility." Greg cut in before she could respond. "Lauren, come on, she's just a kid. You don't want her to struggle, do you?" "A kid?" I shot back. "She's 18. And let's be real, Greg. She's old enough to know better than to expect me to cover this without even asking." Chloe crossed her arms and glared at me. "You're just trying to punish me because of the graduation party." I stared at her, stunned. "Punish you? Chloe, this has nothing to do with the party. This is about money. And the fact that you and your dad seem to think I'm a bottomless ATM?" Greg threw up his hands. "Oh, here we go again. Everything's about money with you, Lauren. Life isn't fair," Chloe muttered under her breath. I turned to her, my patience wearing thin. "You're right, Chloe. Life isn't fair. But that doesn't mean you get to dump all your responsibilities on me. If you want to go to NYU, you need to figure out how to make it happen." The conversation didn't end there, of course. Chloe stormed off to her room, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Greg sat on the couch, sulking like a teenager. For the next few days, the house was a war zone. Chloe wouldn't even look at me, and Greg kept dropping passive-aggressive comments about how I was letting the family down. One night, Greg finally decided to confront me. "You're being selfish, Lauren," he said, standing in the kitchen while I washed dishes. "This is her future we're talking about." I turned to face him, my hands still wet. "Greg, don't you dare call me selfish. I'm just realistic. She's your stepdaughter," he said, like that was supposed to mean something. "You're supposed to support her." "She's only my stepdaughter when it's convenient for you," I shot back. "Every other time I'm just Lauren, the woman who's not her real mom." "Well, not anymore." Greg looked at me like I just slapped him. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. "I'm done being taken for granted. If Chloe wants to go to NYU, she can figure it out with her real mom." The next day, Chloe came downstairs with a new tactic: guilt. She sat at the table, looking teary-eyed, and said, "Lauren, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. I didn't mean to make you feel unappreciated." For a split second, I almost believed her. But then she added, "I just think it's really unfair that you won't help me. You've always said you wanted to give me a better future. Isn't this part of that?" I sighed, sitting down across from her. "Chloe, I do want you to have a good future, but I also want you to learn how to take responsibility for yourself. Life isn't about expecting other people to bail you out." She sniffled dramatically, clearly trying to turn on the waterwork. "I can't believe you do this to me. You're ruining my chances at New York University." "No, Chloe," I said firmly. "You're ruining them by refusing to take any responsibility. You've spent months treating me like I don't matter, and now you expect me to pay for your tuition? That's not how it works." A few days later, Greg tried one last time to pressure me. "Either you pay for Chloe's education," he said, his arms crossed like he was delivering an ultimatum, "or I'm filing for divorce." I stared at him, completely unfazed. "Okay," I said, "file for divorce." He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "You don't mean that." "Oh, I mean it," I said, crossing my own arms. "In fact, I'll call a lawyer tomorrow." For the first time in months, Greg was speechless. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, while I sat there feeling oddly calm. When Greg and Chloe left, I thought I'd feel a little guilty. But as I watched them pack up their things and walk out the door, the only thing I felt was relief. For the first time in years, my house was quiet, peaceful. Greg didn't make a big scene when he left, which honestly surprised me. I think he realized his usual guilt trips weren't going to work anymore. He muttered something about how I'd regret this. Chloe, on the other hand, made sure I knew exactly how she felt. "This is why no one likes you," she snapped as she hauled a suitcase down the stairs. "You're selfish and controlling, and you'll end up alone." I didn't even bother responding. What was the point? She'd already made it clear how little she respected me, and I wasn't about to waste my breath trying to change her mind. Instead, I stood in the doorway and watched as they loaded their stuff into Greg's car. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the prenup I'd insisted on. Greg tried to contest it, claiming he deserved a share of the bakery. My lawyer shut that down fast. I heard bits and pieces about them through mutual friends. Apparently, they were living in a tiny apartment across town. Greg was trying to restart his contracting business, but it wasn't going well. He'd burned a lot of bridges in the industry, and word had gotten around about his poor work ethic. Chloe, meanwhile, had deferred her enrollment at NYU because she couldn't afford the tuition. She was working at a mall, complaining to anyone who would listen about how unfair her life was. One day, I got a message from Chloe. It was short and clearly written in a hurry. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether or not to respond. A part of me wanted to believe she'd finally realized how unfair she'd been, but another part of me knew better. Chloe wasn't reaching out because she cared. She was reaching out because she needed something. Money, most likely. I decided not to respond. I wasn't interested in reopening that door. A few weeks later, Greg tried his luck. He called me one evening while I was at the bakery, working on plans for the grand opening of the second location. "Hey, Lauren," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" I almost laughed. "What do you want, Greg?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. There was a long pause before he finally admitted why he was calling. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to help Chloe out. She's really struggling right now, and I know you care about her deep down." I felt my blood boil. "Greg, let me make this clear. Chloe is not my responsibility. I'm done. If she's struggling, that's on you. And her." He tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. "Goodbye, Greg," I said, hanging up before he could say another word. That was the last time I heard from them. And here, my story ends. Thanks for reading, Redditors. And remember, never let anyone take advantage of your kindness. You deserve better.
Of two daughters, I am the oldest and go by Barbara. I've always been the serious one, the independent one, from as long back as I can remember. Michelle, my sister, was precisely the reverse. Our house was always noisy growing up. Michelle's laughter, Mom and Dad's loving attention on her, and the continual buzz of pop tunes running in the background. Me, I liked peaceful areas, my nose buried in a book or focusing on homework. Birthdays and holidays always made it very evident how different Michelle and I were. She would tear through her presents, squealing with delight over the newest devices or fashion-forward clothing. I, on the other hand, meticulously saved any money I got. "What are you saving for Ratch this time?" Dad would inquire, a trace of pride in his voice, but his eyes revealed he lacked total understanding. "A laptop for learning," I said. "The library computers are often crowded." He nodded, but I could see they didn't understand why I didn't desire what other girls my age did. Michelle was a swirl of fresh ideas and constant pressure. "Mom, did you check out the latest iPhone? Every student at the institution carries it. I need it," she would say. She would also receive it. No questions, no saving. I recall the day I last paid for my laptop. Months of savings had gone on investigating the ideal model. I felt quite proud when I got it home. "Look, at last I understand," I declared at dinner. Mom turned her head from her dish. "That's great, sweetheart. Oh, Michelle, tell us about your mall day." And the topic changed exactly like that. Michelle descended into a protracted narrative about her shopping trip, and my success vanished from view. It was not that they did not love me. I knew they did in their own unique manner. But Michelle was the sun in our family's solar system, and I was a far-off planet gently revolving on my own path. The variations between us just grew as we grew older. Michelle followed the most current fashion trends and experimented with wild hair. I stayed with my comfy trousers and sensible ponytail. The library became my quiet haven where I could concentrate on my objectives, free from any interruptions. When it came time for college, I gave all I had on applications. I stayed late many nights honing essays, investigating scholarships, and preparing for admission tests. One of the finest times of my life came when I received my acceptance letter bearing a full scholarship. Running into the kitchen, I waved the letter. "Dad, Mom, I entered under a full scholarship." Mom turned to help Michelle with her makeup. "That's lovely, sweetheart. Hold steady, Michelle. I'm trying to get your eyeliner exactly correct." Dad turned to check his newspaper. "Good work, Barbara." Nothing less was what we expected. Their lack of enthusiasm wounded, but I was used to it. I returned to my room clutching the letter. This was my opportunity to at last escape, to prove myself. Michelle hardly made it through high school in meantime. The day Sarah handed her failing report card, I considered our parents might at last be let down. Rather, though, they encircled her with encouragement. Mom, patting her hair, whispered, "Oh, sweetie, don't worry. Everyone does not find college to be ideal. You are quite gifted in many other areas." Dad nodded. "That's right, Princess. You will figure out your road." It still astounds me. "Are you sincere? She almost made it." I blurted forward. Mom fixed me a stern glance. "Barbara, try not to be nasty. Your sister is endowed with various gifts." I bit my tongue, then turned to go. Michelle would always be their favorite, no matter what I accomplished. Attaching college was a fresh beginning. I was surrounded for the first time by people that valued diligence and drive. Resolved to maximize this opportunity, I immersed myself into my studies. In my second year, one day I got a call from home. It was Michelle, her voice as usual lively. "Ratch, guess what? I consider enrolling in some classes on beauty. Mom and Dad find that to be a fantastic idea." Though I knew she wouldn't care, I wanted to tell her about the research project I was working on or the summer internship I had landed. After hanging up, I felt both frustrated and motivated. I was on my own path, and I was going to make it count. Years passed quickly. While Michelle jumped from one beauty course to the next without finishing anything, I graduated with honors. I got a job at a top company even before my diploma was dry. Moving into my own apartment was a bittersweet moment. As I unpacked my few belongings, I thought about how different my life was from Michelle's. She was still at home, pampered by our parents, while I was standing on my own, ready to take on the world. The first few months at my job were a blur. I worked longer hours than anyone else, determined to prove myself. Within a year of hard work, I was promoted to team leader. Excited, I called home to share the news. Mom picked up the phone. "Oh, Barbara, that's nice, but guess what? Michelle met the most wonderful boy. He comes from such a good family. We're all so thrilled." As she went on about Michelle's new boyfriend, my promotion seemed to disappear into the background. I hung up, feeling deflated, but it only made me more determined. If my family couldn't value my achievements, I'd just have to achieve even more. I threw myself into my work with everything I had. Days turned into nights and weekends became extra opportunities to get ahead. My hard work paid off. One promotion led to another, and before long, I became the youngest department head in the company's history. One day, Mr. Paul, the company owner, called me into his office. "Barbara, your work has been outstanding. We've never had someone rise through the ranks so quickly," he said with a smile. "Thank you, sir. I love what I do," I replied, beaming with pride. "And it shows," he said. "That's why I want to offer you something special. We have a program for top employees, a chance to buy an apartment at a significant discount. You've earned it." The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and planning. When I finally got the keys to my new apartment, I felt like I was floating. I decided to host a housewarming party to celebrate with the people who mattered most. Since I didn't have much furniture yet, I bought some inexpensive plastic tables and chairs and set everything up with care. Even the disposable tableware matched the decor. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. On the day of the party, my colleagues arrived first, bringing thoughtful gifts and warm congratulations. Then my family showed up. Mom, Dad, and Michelle came in like a whirlwind. Michelle's eyes darted around the room, taking in the modest furnishings. I caught the smirk she tried to hide. As the evening went on, I noticed a pattern. Every time one of my colleagues congratulated me or brought up my accomplishments, my parents would quickly change the subject to Michelle. "Oh, that reminds me," Mom said, cutting off one of my coworkers mid-sentence. "Did Barbara tell you about Michelle's latest modeling gig? She's just so photogenic." Dad chimed in. "Yes, our Mel was born for the spotlight. Such natural talent." I saw the confused and slightly uncomfortable looks on my colleagues' faces as the focus shifted from my achievements to Michelle once again. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Michelle, on the other hand, soaked up the attention. "Oh, Mom, stop it," she'd say with a giggle, clearly enjoying every second. Finally, thankfully, my family left. The moment the door closed, my coworker Laura turned to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Barbara, what the hell was that?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. I shrugged, trying to brush it off. "Oh, that's just how they are." Another colleague, David, shook his head. "No, Barbara, that's not normal. Are you okay? Do you need help?" A lump formed in my throat. Their concern was touching, but also embarrassing. "Guys, really, it's fine. I'm used to it," I said, forcing a smile. "Who wants another drink?" As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could hear them whispering, their worry obvious. I blinked back tears, refusing to let them see how much my family's behavior had hurt me. After that disastrous housewarming, I buried myself in work again, determined to move forward. The months flew by, and slowly I turned my apartment into a home I could truly be proud of. Every piece of furniture, every splash of color on the walls was a reminder of my hard work and independence. One sunny Monday, I decided to treat myself to something I'd been saving for, a car. It wasn't flashy, just a reliable Sedan to get me where I needed to go. As I drove it home, a wave of pride washed over me. This car was mine, bought with my own money, a symbol of everything I had accomplished. I hadn't planned to tell my family, but news spread fast. That evening, my phone rang, and Michelle's cheerful voice came through the speaker. "Ratch, I heard you bought a car. That's nice," she said, though her tone made it clear she didn't mean it. You're really doing things the hard way. All this working and saving. It's so unnecessary." Her words made my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well," she said, as if explaining something obvious, "the main job of a woman is to marry properly. Find a man who will take care of you and give you everything you need. Why work yourself to death when you could have it all handed to you?" I was speechless for a moment. "Michelle, that's not how I see things. I want to earn what I have. I'm proud of what I've accomplished." She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Ratch, always the difficult one. Well, you'll see. I'll show you how it's done." Before I could respond, Michelle had hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. How could we see life so differently? A few months later, I got my answer. Michelle called, her voice full of excitement. "Barbara, you'll never guess. I'm getting married. His name is Nicholas, and he's absolutely loaded. His parents are paying for everything. The wedding's going to be stunning." As she went on about the dresses, flowers, and guest list, I felt an emptiness inside me. This was what she had been working toward, her idea of success. The wedding day came faster than I expected. I stood in a grand hall, surrounded by glittering guests, feeling out of place. Michelle looked radiant in her designer gown, and our parents couldn't stop beaming with pride. I sipped champagne, trying to swallow the bitterness building inside me. Had my parents ever looked at me with such pride? Had they ever been this happy about anything I'd achieved? As the night went on, I felt more and more like a stranger. Michelle thrived in the spotlight, charming the guests and soaking up the attention. Our parents introduced themselves to everyone, proudly announcing, "We're the parents of the bride." On my way home, driving my modest car back to my modest apartment, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the wrong choices. Was Michelle right? Had I chosen the harder path for nothing? But then I thought about my job, my achievements, and the pride I felt knowing I had earned everything on my own. No, I decided. My path might be harder, but it was mine. That made all the difference. After Michelle's wedding, life settled into a routine. Work kept me busy, but my mother's calls became irregular and unwelcome, interruption. Every conversation followed the same pattern. "Barbara, darling," Mom would start, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You won't believe what Michelle's been up to." I'd brace myself as she launched into another story about Michelle's fabulous life. "She's been invited to the most exclusive events. Can you believe it? Our Michelle rubbing elbows with high society. One day, after an especially exhausting call, I couldn't hold back any more. 'Mom, that's great for Michelle,' I said, frustration leaking into my voice. 'But don't you want to know what's going on in my life?' There was a pause. Then Mom said in a patronizing tone, 'Oh, honey, of course we care, but you really should learn from your sister. Be more glamorous. Why work so hard for so little when you could have it all?' A few weeks later, I received an invitation. Michelle and Nicholas were throwing a housewarming party for their new luxury apartment, a gift from his parents, naturally. The night of the party, I stood outside Michelle and Nicholas's building, feeling small. I smoothed down my simple dress, took a deep breath, and walked in. The apartment was breathtaking. Every surface sparkled, and every piece of furniture looked like it cost more than I made in a year. My parents were already there, marveling at every detail. Tried to stay in the background, but Michelle spotted me almost immediately. She walked over, holding a champagne flute, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Barbara, so glad you could make it," she said, her tone sweet but her gaze critical. "I hope you're taking notes. This is how a housewarming should be done. None of that plastic furniture and disposable dishes nonsense like at your place." My cheeks burned. "Michelle, that's—" But she didn't wait to hear the rest, already flitting off to dazzle other guests, leaving me standing there with the sting of her words. In the weeks that followed, Michelle seemed determined to flaunt her lifestyle at every turn. She bought the most expensive things, clothes, jewelry, you name it. Then came the car. One evening after work, a sleek sports car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and there was Michelle, her face smug. "Like it," she purred. "Just a little gift from Nicholas. Thought I'd take it for a spin." I glanced at my plain but dependable sedan. "It's very nice, Michelle." She followed my gaze and laughed. "Oh, Barbara, always settling for less. You'll always be working for others while I live the good life." Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. 3 years passed in a blur of spreadsheets, meetings, and promotions as I climbed the corporate ladder. Meanwhile, Michelle seemed happy hopping from one shopping spree to another. Our lives couldn't have been more different, but I'd learned to accept it, or so I thought. Then, on an ordinary Saturday, everything changed. Mom called, her voice shaky. "Barbara, it's Michelle. She's back home. Nicholas left her. He said she's too shallow, too focused on spending his money. He called her stupid. Can you believe it? And then she signed a prenup. She has nothing. A wave of emotions hit me: shock, concern, and if I was honest, a tiny flicker of vindication. I quickly pushed that feeling aside, ashamed of myself. "I'm coming over," I said, already grabbing my keys. When I arrived at my parents' house, it felt like stepping into a war zone. I could hear Michelle screaming from the driveway. Inside, it was chaos. Michelle was in the living room, mascara streaked down her face, her designer clothes disheveled. She was throwing anything within reach: vases, picture frames, cushions. "He can't do this to me," she shrieked, her voice raw with anger and despair. "I'm Michelle. I'm beautiful. I'm perfect," she cried, her voice filled with rage and tears. Mom and Dad hovered around her, trying desperately to calm her down. "Sweetie, please," Mom pleaded. "We'll figure this out. Dad will buy you a new dress, won't you, dear?" Dad nodded quickly. "Of course, princess. Anything you want." I stood there, watching this strange scene unfold, feeling like I had stepped into an alternate reality. This couldn't be how life was supposed to work, could it? As the days passed, Michelle's tantrums didn't stop. She'd cry for hours, then scream, then demand expensive gifts to make herself feel better. And our parents, eager to keep her happy, gave her everything she asked for. One evening, after another meltdown, I couldn't hold back any more. "Maybe," I said carefully, "Michelle should consider getting a job. It might help her appreciate the value of money and give her something to focus on." The room fell silent. Then, all at once, chaos erupted. Michelle's face twisted in anger. "A job? Like you, slaving away every day like some peasant." She spat. Bursting into tears, she ran upstairs, slamming her door so hard the whole house shook. Before I could even process what had happened, Mom and Dad turned on me. "How dare you?" Mom hissed. "Your sister is going through a terrible time, and you suggest she lower herself to your levels." I didn't mean it like that. I tried to explain, but they weren't listening. "Get out," Dad said, his voice cold. "Get out of this house right now," Mom added, pointing at the door. "And don't come back until you can be supportive of your sister." In a daze, I grabbed my purse and left. When I walked into my apartment, my sanctuary, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness at being rejected by my family, anger at their blindness to Michelle's faults, and oddly, a sense of relief. For the first time, I saw how toxic my family had been all these years. Life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. Just days after the blow-up with my family, I got news that left me stunned. I had won a company contest. The prize, a 5-month, all-expenses-paid cruise around the world. In a moment of weakness, or maybe hope, I decided to call my parents. Maybe this good news could heal the rift between us. "Mom, Dad, you won't believe it. I won a cruise around the world." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then my mother's cold voice broke through. "Barbara, how can you be so selfish? Your sister is going through a terrible time, and you're bragging about vacations?" As though I had been slapped. I said softly, not flaunting anything. "I simply considered." Mom interrupted me, though. "If you had any decency, you would assign that ticket to Michelle," she remarked harshly. "She requires a change of environment. As usual, you can stay home and work." Something inside of me caught fire. Years of irritation burst all at once. "No," I responded with great force. "I was going on this trip. I obtained it. Michelle made poor decisions, so I am not giving it up. I'm traveling." The next several weeks passed in a haze as I prepared. I arranged everything at work, packed my luggage, and on the day of departure, I did something I had never done before. I turned off my cell phone. I felt free for the first time in many years. The cruise fulfilled all I had imagined. In Malta, I saw breathtaking sunsets. In Romania, I saw old ruins, and I strolled through Singapore's crowded streets. I was just Barbara for 4 amazing months, not the family failure or the responsible older sister. All good things, nevertheless, have to fade. Reality struck when the ship grounded back home. Turning on my phone, I expected a deluge of messages, but only a handful of my parents' missed calls. I headed home feeling lighter than I had in years. Heard sounds inside my apartment as I got closer. My pulse thumped. Had somebody broken in? With caution opening the door, she was there. Michelle. She was stretched on my couch, surrounded by empty takeout containers and shopping bags. Michelle, said. I started to gasp. What are you doing here? She looked up, barely reacting to my sudden arrival. Oh, you're back, finally. I stood frozen, my keys still in my hand. How did you get in here? She rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic, Barbara. I used the spare keys you left with Mom and Dad. I needed a change of scenery. Everything at home reminded me of, you know. I stared at her, speechless. This was too much. I need air, I muttered, grabbing my car keys and heading outside. But when I got to the parking lot, my car was gone. Panic set in as I called my parents. Mom picked up, her voice overly cheerful. Barbara, dear, how was your trip? Where's my car? I cut straight to the point. There was a pause, and then Dad came on the line. We sold it. The world seemed to spin. You what? Michelle needed cheering up. Mom said casually, as if it were no big deal. We used the money to take her shopping and to the spa. What I was hearing defied belief. That was my car. You had nowhere right. I yelled. Dad's voice then cut in, sharp and contemptuous. Now, Barbara, we are a family. That is yours. Ours is what is. Do not act selfishly. I snapped something inside of me. Years of frustration, bitterness, and wrath spilled all at once. Selfish. You raided my house, stole my automobile, and I am selfish. I want my money taken back. Now, their response was sharp and instantaneous. They branded me a letdown, unappreciative, heartless. Stung, but for the first time they did not break me. Completely blind to the tempest within me, I hung up the phone, marched back into my flat, and found Michelle still asleep on my couch. Get out, I said softly but forcefully. Startled, Michelle turned to gaze up. Wonderful. Exit, currently. She tried to argue, to dominate me as usual, but this time I moved nothing. For the first time, I started first. The next day, I sued my parents for the worth of my car and paid a lawyer. Furious, they swore to disavow me and cut me from their will. I did not, nonetheless, back off. That matter came before the court. Laying years of financial abuse and emotional manipulation for strangers to hear was exhausting. Still, at least justice was done. My parents had to sell their house to pay for back off since the judge determined in my favor, declaring to everyone who would listen that I was the villain who had destroyed their life. They moved into a modest apartment. Once more, though, their words did not reach me. New from the showroom, my new car made me lighter on the road. First in my life, I felt quite free, released from their expectations, under control and under manipulation. Chose grudgingly to cut off all contact with my family. The first few months were hard. One could sometimes be doubtful and lonely, but I began to live on my own terms gradually. At work, I gave it everything and moved quickly up the ladder. New individuals I encountered valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I moved, developed new interests, and discovered enjoyment in everyday objects. Mostly, I came to enjoy me, to esteem my strength, will, and worth. I smile now as I sit in my office peering out over the city skyline. Though not easy, it was mine. I made this life step by step, decision after decision. I would not change anything.